Hello, my friends, and welcome to Origins. My name's Don Chapman. It's my privilege to be your host. Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and we use it to validate the truth of creation. We have a great guest with us today, an old friend of Origins. Dr. Steve Austin is back with us. Dr. Austin is a PhD in sedimentary geology from Penn State University. Did I say that right?
That's right.
And also, he has found one of the largest fossil finds in the world, the nautiloid, which starts in the Grand Canyon, goes clear to Las Vegas, and really helps to validate the worldwide flood. And also, he's one of the foremost authorities in the world on the Mount St. Helens volcano. But you're here today to talk about Darwin.
Yes, Darwin took a famous journey, and I'm going to talk to you about the way Darwin thought and how Darwin went wrong.
There's a lot of Darwin myth in the world, isn't there?
Yes, we think of Darwin as the old man, like on the screen.
With the beard, yeah.
With the beard and the hat, and but no, he's really, Darwin formulated his ideas about the world as a young man.
And so you're talking about the formation of those ideas and how they happened when he was on the Beagle on his famous world trip.
Yes, and the voyage of the Beagle is the premier event in Darwin's life.
And
as a young man,
that's how he looked when he did the trip.
He took the trip. 25 years old, he's going around the world on the Beagle, and he's the naturalist working for Fitzroy, the captain of the Beagle.
Now, when people think of Darwin, because of the title of his book, The Origin of the Species, you think biology, but you're a geologist, and you're saying that so was Darwin.
Yes, and I started reading Darwin's journal, which is something people rarely do. And it's really a good thing to do, to read Darwin. And I read Darwin's journal, and what fell upon my eyes was this sentence describing his experience on April 26, 1834. The river, though it has so little power in transporting even inconsiderable fragments, yet in the lapse of ages might produce, by its gradual erosion, an effect of which is difficult to judge the amount.
Now, Dr. Austin, when he's writing that and he says the river, is he talking about rivers in general or about one specific river?
One specific river, the Santa Cruz River.
So he's writing this when they're off the coast of Argentina.
Yep, he's actually writing it on the river.
He's out of the boat and on the river.
He's camping.
Now, our title for the show is Where Darwin Went Wrong. The assumption is that he went wrong.
Yes.
And you're going to prove that to us geologically.
Right. Okay. Where Darwin went wrong, how Darwin went wrong, and ultimately why Darwin went wrong. Okay. Those are the kind of the issues that I like to deal with. And thinking about the Santa Cruz River got me started on this process. Now, let's explode a myth.
All
Darwin is supposed to be a biologist.
Right.
He talks about species, and that the only thing that interests him. No. He is a geologist by training and by preparation, and he wrote 10 or 11 geologic papers, peer-reviewed geologic papers. And so I love to show a picture of Darwin's rock hammer. Okay, now if you have a rock hammer, that's a very important sign that you're a geologist. And if you draw geologic maps, that makes you a geologist, right?
Sure.
And Darwin drew the first map of southern South America. And there's Darwin's geologic map, hand-colored and drafted map.
Oh, wow.
And then Darwin drew pictures of strata, layers of strata. And so he drew the basalt cliff on the Santa Cruz River in southern Argentina. And so I got really fascinated with what Darwin saw and what he did.
So now, as a geologist looking at the work of a fellow geologist, how was he doing?
He was interested in the same things I'm interested in. He was interested in strata, the process that erodes strata and exposes them, and in the process that buckles strata layers.
So there's a simpatico between you and he and the way you think and what you're looking at,
yeah. And
that makes you a good person to evaluate his work.
Yes, and so he's a geologist just like me,
yep.
And he has a thinking pattern like mine. And so I am accustomed to thinking that way, and Darwin was too. Even in his cross sections that he drew of the Andes Mountains. Here's, for example, the top illustration is his cross section showing the faults that broke the strata in the Andes Mountains, and the bottom of the screen is a modern geologic cross-section drawn by a geologist. Here's what Darwin said in his notebook in 1838. I, as a geologist, have a defined notion of land covered with oceans, former animals, and slow forces cracking the surface. Charles Darwin was a geologist. He said he was a geologist. He didn't say he was a biologist. He said he was a geologist. There's a book written on this subject. Charles Darwin, geologist. And Sandra Herbert wrote that. Where did Darwin go wrong? We were able to actually research these locations that he went. He saw the boulders of San Sebastian, Bahia San Sebastian in southern Tierra del Fuego. He went to see the valley of the Santa Cruz River, which is in central Patagonia, in southern Patagonia, and then he saw the earthquake and the tsunami deposits in Concepcion in Chile. And he saw these features, and that was what he experienced. Now we can point these out on the map. Here you see the map showing the locations. First he went to San Sebastian there in southern South America. Then he went to Santa Cruz River in Argentina, Patagonia. And then third, he went to Concepcion in northern Chile. And so the voyage of the Beagle took him around, and he saw those premier things. In Tierra del Fuego, in southern South America, Darwin experienced these boulders, and he was fascinated by these large boulders of granite and metamorphic rock that occur along the ocean coast. And he thought about these boulders and experienced them. They're from the core of the Andes Mountains. What are they doing out here?
How do they get from the Andes Mountains to the seashore?
Yeah, and they're big boulders. Okay, it's not an easy thing to imagine how boulders move around. He saw that there were boulders like them up on top of the mesa associated with the platform associated with southern Argentina. And so he went up on the platform and he started seeing these boulders all around the landscape.
Now that's not Darwin there.
Nope, that's not Darwin.
Who is
Those
that?
are geologists, and
I thought that was you.
we love looking at these boulders. But they're big boulders,
Yep.
right? They're 10 and 15 feet in diameter.
Yep.
And that's no easy task to move a big boulder like that from evidently the core of the Andes Mountains. Darwin thought about three things. Darwin thought about flood power moving boulders. Darwin thought about glaciers moving boulders, and Darwin thought about icebergs floating and moving glaciers.
Three options.
Three options. And he considered those three options, and he reflected on all of these options. After the remarkable discoveries of Venetz, Carpentier, Agassiz, and others of the great extension of Europe, moraines formed by ancient glaciers, it is necessary to observe that neither the till beds of eastern Tierra del Fuego nor the stratified gravel and till could have been produced like ordinary moraines, like ice and glaciers. And therefore, they have been embedded boulders, cannot have been propelled by the glaciers themselves.
So he's throwing out the glacier theory.
He's dismissing the glacier idea.
Okay.
And then he reflected on the idea that big flood power moved glaciers, and that became kind of offensive to his thinking. And so he thought about the boulders as being transported by floating ice, and imagined icebergs from the central Andes Mountains, from glaciers, those icebergs being floated out and the boulders being dropped. And this is the explanation he published in 1842 on the distribution of erratic boulders. But geologists have gone back to that site now after 175 years. We're talking about a gigantic lateral moraine, a direct glacier ice deposit there at there at Bahia San Sebastian. And geologists have endorsed that. The next place that Darwin went was up the Santa Cruz River in southern Argentina, in Patagonia. And he left the Beagle in the bay, and then he took the journey up the Santa Cruz River, over 100 miles. 25 of the crew of the Beagle pulled 3 whale boats, and they explored the upper drainage of the Santa Cruz River. And the Santa Cruz River is an amazing place. And of course, Darwin at the Santa Cruz River wrote about the river, though it has so little power in transporting even inconsiderable fragments, yet in the lapse of ages might produce by its gradual erosion an effect of which is difficult to judge the amount. He imagined a slow and gradual action of this river formed a 6-mile wide valley. And wow, what an interesting thought, but probably wrong. And so that's why I got involved in studying this. I call it Camp Darwin. There it is, there on the Santa Cruz River, Camp Darwin, April 26, 1834. As I investigated that site where Darwin camped, right here on the campsite, you can see the basalt cliff as he's looking at the valley, and he's thinking about the river. So little power, transporting inconsiderable fragments, yet in the lapse of ages might produce by its gradual erosion effect it was difficult to judge the amount. Darwin looked at this and camped right here on this campsite, and he, at this campsite, investigated up this cliff and saw the boulders on top and came back down. I was able to walk the exact path that Darwin walked, and thinking about that. It's an amazing place. Anyway, as I walked up there, I saw evidence of a gigantic flood over a huge area. Darwin reflected on it, and he thought about the power on the opposite sides of the valley and the rock layers, and he reflected upon this, and he thought about the evidence of the mass of very hard rock which had been eroded 300 feet deep, up to 6 miles wide, and he thought about the river, though it has so little power in transporting even inconsiderable fragments, yet in the lapse of ages might produce by its gradual erosion an effect of which is difficult to judge the amount. Darwin got deceived by what he saw, and he didn't see what he needed to see. For some reason, he's wearing sunglasses that prevent him from seeing things. Now, I, as a trained geologist, going back, reflecting on the 3 options that he was considering, can see a better answer to these things. And I think Darwin neglected the correct answer. Instead, he went into this different domain of thinking. The boulders of the level areas of the head of the Santa Cruz River are strewn on land, and he talks about, hence I conclude that the boulders were transported by floating ice. And imagine the ocean being over this platform and these boulders being floated in and dropped by icebergs, when really they were formed by a gigantic flood, a colossal flood, about 8,000 times the present Santa Cruz River. And as you look at the Santa Cruz River Valley, you can see these gigantic diluvial dunes. Look at these big bed forms. They're like, on a large scale, like things you might see in a flume or in a river. But these are 200 feet high. And so these are very important structures. As I looked at the giant boulder bar on the south side of the Santa Cruz River, these big boulders, 3 feet in diameter, I was thinking about the colossal problem that Darwin had. He went wrong. We see the evidence upstream of the glacier ice and the evidence of an ice dam and evidence of drainage of a lake. Catastrophic drainage of a gigantic post-flood lake may have formed the Santa Cruz River Valley.
Now, that's fascinating. We've got to take a break, but when we come back, I want you to clarify for us as we draw our show to a conclusion what Darwin saw, where he went wrong, and the evidence that you found that you think gives us the right answer. So don't you go away. We'll be back to look at this evidence and draw some conclusions in just a minute.
Today's guest on Origins, Dr. Steve Austin, is a field research geologist with his PhD in sedimentary geology. He is the senior research geologist with Logos Research Associates and teaches geology at Cedarville University in Ohio. Steve has done extensive work all over the world, especially at the Grand Canyon and Mount St. Helens. He is the author of many books, videos, and more than 30 technical geology papers. One of his videos deals with the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. To order the DVD, call 509-551-5343. To contact Dr. Austin, write to Logos Research Associates, 3232 West MacArthur Boulevard, Santa Ana, California, 92704.
We are back with Dr. Steve Austin, and we're talking about Darwin and where he went wrong. And Dr. Austin, you were down in Argentina at the very place where Darwin really did a shift in his thinking.
Yes, right on the Santa Cruz River, there's evidence of a giant glacier in the past which made an enormous lake.
Now, we have a picture of a glacier here.
There's a glacier in the upper drainage basin of the Santa Cruz River today. There was a huge glacier that made a giant lake, 60 or 80 miles long, maybe 30 or 40 miles wide, something like that, a huge lake. And evidently that lake drained, it failed catastrophically, and it eroded this canyon that Darwin saw.
And so your thesis is that because Darwin had this idea of ice flows in mind, he missed the evidence for the flood when the dam broke.
Yes, he missed the obvious explanation of this canyon, I believe.
And that's what you're calling his sunglasses. When you've got one worldview of thinking, you sometimes miss the obvious.
Yes. Okay, he went down to the Beagle, back to the Beagle, and he sailed around on the Pacific side of South America. And while he was in southern Argentina, the earthquake occurred February 20, 1835, the Concepcion earthquake in Chile. Now, he was not at the epicenter of the earthquake, but he was south of it, quite a distance, and he experienced the earthquake.
He felt the earth shaking.
And, of course, there was a tsunami, a smaller tsunami, but it affected them. And so they ventured north to Concepcion, the epicenter of the earthquake of February 20, 1835. And he saw the evidence of the catastrophic earthquake and the tsunami. And there's the beaches of San Sebastian. And here you see a oblique satellite view showing Concepcion, the location where this occurred. You can see the offshore island was uplifted by the earthquake, and it caused the tsunami to be propelled onto the land. And it devastated the coastal villages in the city of Concepcion. So very catastrophic earthquake, and he experienced this. He went to the epicenter area, Concepcion, and then he ventured up into the Andes Mountains. He was believing that mountains form by slow shrinkage of and cracking of the earth. Here's part of his drawings of how he thought mountains were formed by slow cooling and shrinking of the earth. What he saw, and he drew in his cross-section, was quite different than what he imagined mountains were. And so he drew the picture of the Andes Mountains as he crossed the Andes Mountains, came back, and on the top diagram we see the picture, or the image, of the cross-section of the Andes Mountains that Darwin drew. And then down at the bottom of this image we see a modern cross-section drawn by a geologist. And so this view of the mountains fascinated Darwin. Darwin thought that mountains formed by slow tectonic forces uplift directly in the mountains. What he saw, though, was the evidence of the offshore uplift of the islands and the pushing or the compression that made the Andes Mountains. And so Darwin thought that mountains formed by tension or pull apart. What he actually experienced was the thrusting or the moving together of the mountains.
Was he able to adjust his thinking to what he saw?
He actually did. He kind of neglected what he saw, and he went into the theory of how he imagined
He
mountains
couldn't get
would
over
form.
the theory to see the truth.
And so he's wearing these sunglasses again.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, well, Darwin rejected catastrophism, the idea that geologic features form rapidly. Instead, he favored this idea that things form slowly. The boulders of San Sebastian down there in southern tip of South America, they were deposited directly by a gigantic glacier. That's what we know. But Darwin imagined icebergs floating them. And then the valley of the Santa Cruz River was eroded by colossal glacial outburst mega flood, if you will. And Darwin thought about slow marine erosion, the ocean being over the area, and then the retreat of the ocean and the slow erosion of the river. It was not a mega flood, it was just slow and gradual. And so Darwin missed that point. And then finally, the earthquake and the tsunami, February 20, 1835, at Concepcion, it illustrated an episode of compressional uplift of the island offshore, from force offshore. Darwin thought of slow and continuous tension acting in mountains, forming them directly underneath the mountain. So Darwin got the wrong answers for the major geologic features.
He's 0 for 3 here.
Yes, 3 strikes and you're out maybe, but
Yeah.
the important thing is Darwin saw what he needed to see. He could have made the correct interpretation. What stopped Darwin from seeing things correctly?
You know, Dr. Austin, there's a passage in the Bible where God speaks from heaven. This is in the Gospel of John. And he says, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." But it said the people around him thought that they just heard thunder. Their own preconception wouldn't allow the option that God had spoken, so they had to come up with something else. I see that sort of in Darwin, is that he's trying to find an alternative to what was almost obvious if you just took off the sunglasses.
Yes, and so that is the reality of Darwin.
Yeah.
As a geologist. He has an agenda, or there's something going wrong here with his basic way of interpreting the world. And of course, we know about that. He was reading a book by Charles Lyell called Principles of Geology. And the book Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell was the sunglasses that he wore.
Exactly.
And that sunglasses affected his whole perception of the world.
So if there wasn't a Lyell, would there have been a Darwin?
Probably not. So Lyell gave the interpretive framework to Darwin to see the world.
And he's reading this almost simultaneously with what he's seeing, so it's shaping what he views.
Evidently, Captain Fitzroy of the Beagle gave Darwin a copy of the newly published book, Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell. If Darwin had not published Origin of Species, would we even want to remember his geologic work today? And the probability, or the answer would be no. I think we wouldn't want to remember Darwin because he didn't have very good interpretation of the geologic features he saw.
There's really nothing in these works you've looked at today that would distinguish him
As a geologist.
Yeah.
His geologic work, his observations were significant, but his interpretations were deficient. Darwin got it wrong. And the foundation of what Darwin did as a geologist was flawed by this agenda or perspective that he had.
In fairness, we have to say hindsight's always 20/20. But he had such an impact on the way we thought for 150 years after that, that we have to go back and say, you know, because he was wrong here, we've made some mistakes since then, and we need to correct those because what we're always after is the truth.
That's right.
And you've helped us to see the truth. Thanks for taking the time to go down to the southern tip of Argentina and to look at rocks and to visit his camp and to bring the truth back to us. It's been great having you with us today.
Thank you.
And folks, it's been great having you with us too. You know, as we look at the detailed evidence that confirms God's creation, I want you to always remember one thing. It's God's view that He created you, and that should be your worldview too. Hope to see you again soon here on Origins. And until then, God bless you, my friend.
thank you for watching this edition of Origins. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins, program number 1208, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.